Dwight Dively. I'm the Director of the Office of Performance Strategy and Budget. So I think to help with today's discussion, I have 6 particular points I think I would like to make. So first of all, I know all of you know this, but people who might be watching probably don't. We have an independent forecast office here at King County that develops our revenue forecast. It works jointly for the council and for the executive. And the idea is to remove any kind of politics from the forecasting process. The Forecast Council and the staff of the Forecast Council develop a forecast 3 times a year. There's one in March, there's one in July, and one in August. And so that's the information we use and the council uses in making decisions about budgets and transit planning and so on. So just so everyone understands where the numbers come from. A second point to make, so the change in the sales tax forecast for Metro Transit between the adopted budget, which used figures from about a year and a half ago, to the figures that came out last month in March, in the near term is about $30 million per year. So for 2014, for example, the forecast is up about $30 million. Further out into the future, those forecasts converge, and the difference is only about $15 million a year. The reason for that is most forecast models will recognize that if growth happens sooner, subsequent growth is probably going to be a little smaller. So they tend to converge back to roughly the same level. So that's really good news, that the forecast is up by $30 million. But we need to put some context around that. So the third point I'd like to make this morning is to recognize that the Transit Now forecast, the forecast that was adopted the last time the voters voted on a sales tax increase for transit, for 2014, was $180 million more than our current forecast. So even though the current forecast is up $30 million, it's still $180 million less than was expected prior to the Great Recession. And that just gives you a sense of the order of magnitude of that recession.
And Dwight, if I can interrupt you, that was just for this year.
That was just for this year.
And you at Metro began to build a system to carry that Transit Now delivery out
into the future. And in fact, the gap, if you look at the numbers, the gap gets larger every subsequent year. So if you go out, let's say 7 or 8 years, it's over $200 million difference on an annual basis. So a fourth point I think that's important to recognize, that the sales tax change is important, but it's only one of many factors that affect transit's finances. So it's important to understand that there are other changes that have either been made by policy or just have happened that make a difference. So for example, transit for years now has sustained its service levels by drawing down its reserves. It has postponed bus purchases that now need to be made. It has adopted new policies, or the council has adopted new policies, things like the low-income fare, which have valuable public policy benefits, but also reduce revenue and have administrative expenses. So I've actually talked to folks who said, well, geez, the congestion reduction charge is going away, but you have this extra $30 million. Don't those kind of cancel out? And they don't, because of all the other things that have to be factored into the equation as well. And then finally, part of the forecast that we are using is we're looking out into the future and we're saying, well, we need to start preparing for the next recession. And so the council adopted policies a few years ago, really good policies in my opinion, to have a revenue stabilization reserve for the transit system, so that in good times you start to put away money to buffer the next recession and the impact it has on sales tax. And in fact, that reserve is largely how transit has preserved services this far. Now's the time we have to start rebuilding that, because probably by the end of this decade, we'll have another recession. And so we did a little modeling around a mild recession, nothing like the last 2 that we've been through, much milder than that. And even at the $550,000 or 50,000 hour reduction, if you model that next recession in 2018, 2019, you use up the entire revenue stabilization reserve at that point. So we think this is a prudent and conservative proposal that recognizes the fact that revenue is a little higher in the near term, but also prepares transit to have a sustainable future.
So if I can make sure I understand what you're saying there, we built a rainy day fund.
Mm-hmm.
The rainy day came. In fact, it was
rained.
Torrential downpour in that Great Recession. We have mostly used up the rainy day fund to keep buses on the road. And in fact, we quit doing things that we normally would do, which is like buy new buses.
Right.
And we're about out of money in terms of reserves, as I understand it. And so while we're up $15 million over the longer-term forecast per year, we have a $75 million structural deficit, as I understand it, in terms of the operating and the capital. That doesn't fill a whole lot of that.
Right. That's exactly right.
All right.